Hi, my name is Catherine Bennett and welcome to the Cyber Chat Studio. In this episode, I am joined by Graham Moore. Nice to meet you, Graham, and how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Catherine, and great to be here.
Fantastic. So we are going to be talking about a little bit of tech in a second. But firstly, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, what led you on your journey into cybersecurity, and perhaps a little bit about why you like it so much?
Yeah, sure. So where do I start? Because I've been in IT for about 30 years, ever since I left school. And I worked in a variety of different roles. I didn't start in cybersecurity. I started as a Unix systems administrator, working in IT support teams for various different companies over the period of time. Really, I think what happened is I started to see the emergence of the internet. When I began, no one had an email address, right? Unbelievably. And then the internet gained a lot of momentum, and we started to see retailers trying out like home grocery shopping online and home deliveries.
Yeah.
And in IT, we thought, well, yeah, okay, that's going to work, right? There was a lot of skeptical people at the time thinking, surely people aren't going to want somebody picking their fruit and veg. They're going to want to do it themselves in the store. But we knew that it would work out, that the technology would develop on, and you'd have a hybrid approach like you got today. People do both, right? But as we started to see that unfold, sorry?
How it's changed from from then to today's world.
Exactly that, right? Technology has advanced, and now it's become mainstream, right? Everybody thinks, yeah, great, I can just do a big monthly shop perhaps, and then sort of go once or twice to the local convenience store and top up what's in my fridge, right? So it's definitely it was always going to take off, but the thing for me is at the time I was looking at it thinking this is going to bring out some major security challenges, right? Because people are paying online, and now look at it today, right? I pay for my brown bin for my garden waste bin. I pay for that online every year, right? I get an email from the council. I log onto their website and I pay my annual brown bin subscription. So almost everything, self-assessment tax returns, your car tax disc, everything the government wants you to do all online, right? So I always knew that was going to pose quite a lot of security challenges, that hacking and attacking would evolve as a result of that, and I thought cybersecurity would be a really interesting area to migrate into. I was lucky enough to actually join a company where my previous skills were very much in need, but also they had a division that was cybersecurity related. So it gave me a lot of training and the tools that I needed to develop that part of my career. In fact, the piece of art on the wall behind me is by a British artist called James Aim, and he lives in Tel Aviv. So I spent a lot of time in Tel Aviv looking at his graffiti work, and that was something I brought back with me. But having spent a lot of time in the Middle East and particularly Israel, working with lots of different people to sort of strengthen my cybersecurity knowledge, it's been a really, great move for me. And the last 15 years has really kept me busy.
Nice. And I think it's nice to see as well in terms of travel, how different countries or their approach to cybersecurity and what we do and how they've evolved, sometimes whether it's US, UK, some are leading, some are kind of flagging behind, but we're all roughly catching up at some stage. So I guess, from your side, for the listeners out there, tell us a little bit, perhaps maybe something that they wouldn't necessarily know about yourself, or what do you like to do outside of work?
Yeah. So outside of work, I like to be honest, not touch a computer. So I tend to down tools a bit. Go and recharge the batteries, and the way I do that so that I'm fresh for the next week is actually I own a boat, and I take that down the river, and life slows down to about 4 miles an hour, and then I can go and sit on a riverbank and maybe have a read, and that's probably when I do my I don't down tools completely, because I'll probably sit there and do some reading, and and learn some new stuff that I didn't know before about various different topics, right? So, but to me, that's my relaxation, and something that I do is different. And it's also something that my family loves doing as well. So we all tend to spend a lot of time in the middle of nowhere on some random river that we've just decided whether we turned left or right at the very last minute, you know.
Nice. And all we need is a little bit of sunshine in the UK, I guess.
It helps.
So my yeah, exactly. And I think the last sort of question in terms of yourself is, where do you see yourself in 5 or even 10 years' time? What's the kind of the journey ahead for you?
I think, after having sort of 30 years in IT, that's a lot of background experience, 15 years in cybersecurity. I think for me, it's nice when I can sort of exchange that knowledge with other people. So I think for me, it's a little bit about sort of mentoring other people, educating other people. Mm-hmm. I like talking, so so to go and talk to people about cybersecurity is a real joy for me. I'm quite happy, and people ask me, right? If I'm down my boat club on the weekend, people ask me stuff. It's amazing how many people ask, say, hey, I got this phishing email, or what do you think to this? Or I got this link, and, what should I do? And they ask quite a lot of cybersecurity questions in their day-to-day life, right? So I find that I'm often answering those, and I quite enjoy that. And they say to me, well, how does that work? How on earth could that happen? Right? Yeah. And then I enjoy actually explaining it, hopefully in ways that people can understand without too much sort of technology speak and acronyms in the way,
Yeah, and I think it's nice to pass on that knowledge. I mean, quite frequently I'll say to my children, gosh, it used to be this way and we used to have that. And they can't quite believe it sometimes when we're talking about, things that were 10, 15 years ago. So I think that's, nice to have that experience to then be able to pass on to the kind of the next generation of cybersecurity experts. So I think that's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your current role, I guess, and kind of what that involves in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, so my current role, I'm actually what we call a sort of channel sales engineer. What that basically means is I actually am a techie at heart, right? But what I do is I actually go around the partners that my company works with to educate them on cybersecurity topics. Because a lot of these organisations, they provide great technology solutions, services to organisations, but they're providing technology from a huge number of different IT vendors, people that are making hardware or software in the cybersecurity space. And sometimes they're also working outside the cybersecurity space, right? So productivity tools, email platforms, that sort of stuff. So they have a really major task because they're working with so many different technologies and solutions that it's hard for them to really remember all of this, right? And to know, what are the key points, the key benefits, and, how does this technology work? What is it going to do? What problem is it going to solve? How is it going to solve it? So my job really is to go around and speak to these partners and educate them on that and say, these are the types of issues that are out there. This is the threat landscape. This is how attackers are evolving their attacks and the types of techniques that they're using, the new cunning methods that we're seeing out there, because they're always coming up with something new almost daily. And this is how we could address that, or how they could address it for their customers. So I really love that, because it's exactly where, I said a moment ago that I'd like my career to develop, which is really about using my past experience and knowledge to explain how do these attacks unfold, how do they happen, what is the attacker trying to do, what's their motive, what's their objective, why is it dangerous, how could I do something using not only technology but sometimes sort of business process and procedures as well, in order to reduce risk and mitigate any cybersecurity risk that organisations might have. So it's a very enjoyable role.
Brilliant. No, that's really interesting. So I guess, in terms of today's episode, what we wanted to talk about was insider threat. So it's it's quite a hot topic at the moment, as we kind of look in the news and the press and the industry. We've given so much to insider threat awareness, but what do we actually mean by that? And if you could help to explain in layman's terms, how would you describe insider threat?
Right, I'll try. Yeah, so insider threat. I think when you hear the words insider threat, you think straight away. I think people tend to think that, wow, okay, we're talking about somebody who is a bad actor, who's working inside the organisation, some kind of spy or whatever else. And it's a lot more straightforward than that. Trouble is, though, it's a lot more common as well. So insider threat, what we really mean by that is there are things that could happen inside your organisation that could be problematic, and people as well.
Yeah.
And not necessarily with malicious intent. It's not that you've got a bad threat actor that's joined your business and they're trying to steal data from inside out and they're, a bad guy that's joined. It's not necessarily like that. Of course, that is one possibility, right? But actually more commonly, it's around people do their job and they use lots of tools to do their job. And sometimes they might do things in a way that is a little bit risky and could pose a risk to the organisation. Now, before we get too much into insider threat, let's have a think about threats in general and what most organisations are doing. And even people, by the way, it's not just organisations, but people like yourself. You've probably got, one or more personal webmail accounts. You might use some kind of online storage for your photos and your private documents and stuff. So you've got your own environment that you need to protect as well as an organisation. Almost everybody has data that is in the cloud somewhere that they need to protect. And what we think of is external threats. Our minds jump straight away to this attacker out there on the internet somewhere is trying to get into my email account and they're trying to get into my, online shopping account and they're trying to get my credit card numbers or whatever else. And of course, that's true. And we've done a very good job over the last few years of raising awareness about external threat actors, campaigns, threat vectors and techniques and so on. And a lot of organisations have done a very good job of protecting themselves from external threats. Problem is, not everything is external. And if you only focus on external threats, you're still going to have an upstairs window open, right? You've locked the doors, you've locked the downstairs windows, but you left an upstairs window open. And that upstairs window is the fact that there's still risk that is posed inside your organisation. Now, that could be that people in your organisation just are not aware of cybersecurity risks and maybe they need some cybersecurity training. But often we need to go a little bit deeper than that. We need to actually understand what are your people doing on a day-to-day basis. What types of things are they doing? What actions are they carrying out? Do they fall in line with what corporate IT policy says is okay? Or are they finding ways of doing their job a little bit quicker, maybe taking some shortcuts, using some really useful tools that they're downloaded, applications that they can download and install in their, email account or whatever to organise their calendar and contacts better or whatever else. Because sometimes these tools can be rather dangerous. They can maybe overshare permissions, give access to all your email, give access to your calendar. So that can be problematic, right? Some of these applications people use. But it's also just the types of things that they might do. If people work from home a lot these days, right? So they might be in the office one day and then they might decide that they want to take some data home with them. So they might not be able to do that. They might not be able to upload that file to the web, right? So if they can't, they might revert to the old-fashioned method of put a USB thumb drive in, right, and copy documents to a USB stick, which organisations really don't want to see, right? They go missing, they get lost, they get put in a drawer, the data never gets deleted, it's there 10 years later, right? So we don't want those types of actions either. But those are actions that aren't malicious, right? These are actions of people that are just being what I would call negligent, right? And they might not actually really be aware that they're being negligent, right? So it just needs pointing out to them, hey, please don't do that. Here's the computer use policy. Please remind yourself of those, right? Just a gentle tap on the shoulder and a reminder of, please don't use these tools or don't use these methods. But you can see why people might want to do it. They just want to do their job in the easiest, quickest way for them. And often that means shortcuts and doing things that with data that could be quite risky. I can give you a good example, actually. This week, or I think it was actually end of last week, what hit the media is a really big data breach for a police service. It's very public. It's in the public domain. You can go and read about it. But basically what was shared is information under the Freedom of Information Act, right? So the person shared a spreadsheet. I think it was uploaded to a website for sharing with other organisations. And they're doing their job in good faith. They're not a malicious person at all, but they are just wanting to share the information that's been asked for, which is rightly supposed to be shared. However, in that spreadsheet was an additional tab that they hadn't noticed. So this is human error. Human error happens, right? We're all human. We all make mistakes. But on that tab contained a lot of detailed information about the police officers, what their roles were, their job titles, etc., the grade or standing they had in that organisation. And that is extremely dangerous information, apparently fairly catastrophic, right? Luckily, I believe it didn't have any address information in there, as if that did have, that would have been even more catastrophic situation and very dangerous to people's safety. But you can see how easy that is to happen, right? Now, this really, protecting against insider threats is really about looking at these different types of risks in an organisation. I like to break them down into three areas. You've got risky users that are negligent, right? Like that example I just gave, someone sharing a document, not realising there was an additional tab of information on there. You've also got the malicious insider. You have got that person that, is wanting to steal data from your organisation. Who might they be? They might be people that are leaving to go to a competitor, right? That's one possibility. Sometimes I think you could almost merge those two, though, right? It's negligent and malicious, because sometimes I think that people take data with them to another job because they created it and they think they own it. So perhaps it's a little bit harsh to say that they're totally malicious, but they are in a way, because obviously that data was created while on the payroll of that organisation. So the intellectual property of that data belongs to that organisation. And we've seen this, many times where data gets leaked. And when we look into the reasons why, the motivations are different. But certainly a big one could be leavers in an organisation, taking their work with them to another job role, right, with another organisation. Lastly, it's the compromised user. Now, this is something we need to be careful of, I think, when we're looking at insider threats. I would advise organisations that they really need to combine, when looking at any kind of insider threat solution or technology, that it must be combined with threat intelligence. And there's a very good reason for that. It would be awful to go and accuse an employee in an organisation of stealing company data only to find out that it wasn't them. I mean, you can imagine the damage that would do between the relationship between employee and employer. It would be a horrible situation to arise. And that can happen, right? Because it could look like somebody is trying to steal data. But if you actually look at threat intelligence and the types of threats that are coming into the organisation, you could find that user has been caught up in some kind of email phishing campaign. They accidentally clicked the link. Maybe they thought they were logging into their email client to accept some updated terms and conditions or something, but it was actually a fake login page. And what they've actually done is handed their credentials, the crown jewels really, to their email account to an external threat actor. Now, the problem here is that their account becomes compromised. right? Someone can log into their account, get access to it. They can do all sorts of nefarious activity, and you could be accusing that person of being an insider and malicious. And actually, it's not. Their account has been taken over. So account takeover is something to really watch out for. So we do need to have that overlap and that knowledge sharing and information sharing between the types of solutions we use to protect against external threats, but also technology that we might deploy to protect against any insider threat that might occur in an organization, and to protect that data from leaving the organization, whether that's through negligence, through malicious activity, or, as I said, through a compromised user.
Brilliant. No, thanks for explaining that. And I guess, coming up next month, we've got the Global Insider Threat Detection kind of awareness program, not just obviously with one company, but globally. The way you've kind of spoken about insider threats, previously we've always thought about it being perhaps maybe government organizations or, perhaps maybe some of the bigger corporates. For anybody who's listening to insider threat or learning about it for the first time, do you think it's targeted at one particular organization? Do you think it's across the board? Obviously, as you've mentioned, it's down to employees. I guess every company has employees, right? So would you say that every company should be looking at this as a technology? And I suppose more importantly, where would you recommend that an organization start?
Yeah, so
just a couple of questions.
Yeah, two things jump to mind there. One is around the organizations. Is every organisation at risk? Well, yeah, they are, but to different degrees, right? And then to the other point is, where do I start, right? So let's start with organisations first and who's most at risk. Some organisations are going to be more at risk than others, for sure. But it is a problem that affects every organisation because, as you said, every organisation has employees, and every employee could potentially make a human error. In the way we described to that other scenario with that spreadsheet being shared, you can see how that could happen in any organisation, right? Where you could accidentally email the wrong document even, right? I think a lot of people probably recognise that, the problem that where, you've either done it yourself or you've heard of a colleague doing it. And that's where you email something to somebody and then you pick the wrong Graham or the wrong Catherine and you think, oh, whoops, I've just sent a document externally to the wrong recipient. You really wish you could recoil that message very quickly. So, human error is always going to happen.
And you've got other areas as well, haven't you, like GDPR and all those other the kind of standards that we have to adhere to. So it's a massive thing, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. So for some organisations, they have a lot more critical data than others, and they have a lot more risk. So if you're in finance, and you're dealing with financial documents, that's going to be a lot more risky than some other organisations. But if you're working in an employee working in research and development, right? Maybe you were developing the latest COVID vaccine in a science lab, right? That kind of intellectual property is the gold for the organisation, right? They can't afford for that to leave. Equally, you might be in research and development in a automotive manufacturer, designing the latest greatest electronic vehicle component, right? You do not want that being handed over to your competitors, right? If you're working on the latest battery technology or whatever. So these types of organizations have really, really important intellectual property that they can't afford to leave. Other organizations like medical, healthcare, they have that GDPR protected data, right? Personally identifiable information. You can't afford for that to leave the organization, right? That could result in big fines. It's a big problem. It's an issue for your users of your service. It's their personal data, their medical records. That's not nice. Education can also be a problem as well. If you look at education, you have so many new people coming into the organisation, but equally you have loads of people leaving every year. So how do you manage those identities? And this is where we can then start to move into talking about sort of identity management as well, which is a whole nother topic that you can probably do another podcast on, Catherine, and I'd be happy to join you and talk about it sometime. But identity management becomes a problem, right? Because we need to make sure that as people join or leave an organisation, we clean up their accounts and, you know, don't leave accounts lingering around. So, yeah, the risk depends on the type of organisation. Certainly some verticals, some industry sectors are going to be more risky and more in need of insider threat management technologies than others. By the way, it's not just technology.
Yeah.
They need to think about deploying a program. Technology is only one half of this, right? The other half is around building a program for information protection, because organizations will have different risk profiles. What one organization sees as reasonably acceptable might really not be acceptable to another organization because of the types of data they're dealing with. So, you know, I might not want any of my users to be able to use their personal webmail in their lunch break, right? Because they're working in such a closed environment with sensitive data, it's too risky. But if I work in another environment where it's not quite such a high risk, I might want them to have those kind of freedoms in their lunch break. I might want them to be able to surf the internet and download their email and that type of stuff. So we have to build a program of what's acceptable to that particular organisation, and then put in place processes and procedures. And only then does technology really come into play, I think. So where do you start was the next point, right? When we talk about a program for information protection and we start talking about building policies or procedures and then implementing technology, it sounds really, really cumbersome and like a really big project that we're about to kick off that could last years. And, you know, it did used to be like that. Today, I would say it no longer needs to be like that. Where we should start is with where the greatest risk lies. And that's why we tend to start with insider threat management. When we're looking at an overall information protection solution for an organisation, what a lot of cybersecurity professionals will tell you is that's a very big topic to take on. And maybe you want to break it down into smaller chunks and smaller phases. And the best phase and the best chunk to start with is to look at insider threat and to look at where do the risks lie within your organisation? Who are the most risky people in your organisation? Or who are the ones that are very vulnerable? Are the ones that are more likely to be targeted by attackers, the ones that have access to critical data, maybe have access to privileged systems as well? So I would start by looking at like new hires into the organisation. I'd certainly create a watch list for leavers, ones that are leaving the organisation. That's not to say everyone who resigns and hands in their notice and is leaving is a bad person, right? But it would make sense to at least watch them a little bit closer, you know. And when we define this group of people or groups of people, we can start to identify maybe 5% of the organisation that we should be looking at. We don't need to look at everybody straight away in the organisation, right? The majority of people in the organisation are just doing their job, doing it diligently, and don't pose that much of a risk, right? They might pose risks in other ways. They might click on links, open attachments, and they need some security awareness training. But in terms of insider threat management, they probably aren't high on the radar. You really want to focus in on those ones that could be. And that's probably about 5% of your users. And for those users, you can deploy technology that would look at what they're doing and put in place some technology to make sure that we protect them and the organisation. And I say them because don't forget, it's not all malicious activity, right? Technology could have protected that person who shared that spreadsheet with that additional tab. Quite straightforward, really. We could have, when they upload that document to a website, we could have a quick scan of that document and say, hey, this contains, you know, job titles and ranks and so on. It looks like personally identifiable information, and we could block that from being uploaded. Create an alert on the screen for that user to see that this file should not be shared because it contains personally identifiable, potentially sensitive information. That would also alert the security team, and the security team could go and take a look at that and check it out and take whatever remediation action is necessary. Okay. And that would prevent that data from leaving the organization. So I think insider threat is a very good place to start when on any kind of information protection journey. If you're looking at worrying about how is data being used, accessed, who's creating it, where are they moving it from and to, and why are they moving it, they're all the things you should be thinking about. But we can then break it down and look at the most risky users and protect those users first. And then only after you've done that, would you then really look at perhaps rolling out something on a more lightweight scale for every user in the organization. If you look at every user in the organization, there's probably some policies you could put in place for everybody that doesn't have to be cumbersome. You know, you could put in place a policy that says, you know, I don't know, no one is allowed to upload to these particular websites. You know, you could say, I don't mind them uploading to known legitimate file shares like SharePoint, for instance, but I don't want them uploading to, you know, Google Personal Drive. So you could put in place some kind of policy that would cover everyone in the organization very quickly to protect them from oversharing corporate information over private channels. And just lastly, before, you know, I finish on this, is you know, mentioning the word channels. This is where information protection and insider threat management has really changed over recent years. In the past, we were looking at very few channels. Data tended to reside in a data center, probably on a file server in an organization, and that data center was looked after by that organization. Things are very different today, right? You think about the data you create and access and how you share it with people. It no longer resides in the company's own data center on their file server, right? It's now in Amazon, you know, it's in AWS, Azure, OneDrive, Dropbox, SharePoint. Maybe they use some kind of CRM system like Salesforce, or they use an HR platform like Workday. Data resides in so many different places and people access it and move it, right? So we need to be mindful of that. They might email it, right? And if they find for some reason they can't email it, they might try and upload it somewhere. So they're going to try multiple different channels for moving data around the place. So any kind of solution you look for needs to be able to be aware and protect you over all of those different channels. That would be, you know, email, cloud, web, and even on their endpoint. Okay, what I mean by endpoint is their laptop, desktop device, you know, making sure that they're, you know, we know what they're doing on their machine. And don't forget, we still need to incorporate that threat intelligence to make sure that it's not an account takeover. Okay, so there's quite a lot of things to think about from both a program and technology perspective. I think where we're talking about insider threat management, it's definitely the place to start.
And you mentioned obviously earlier about, you know, GDPR and kind of keeping information sensitive, but at the same time, obviously providing intelligence. What do we mean by privacy design, and what can we do when we're actually looking at a solutions provider of insider threat management to kind of make sure that obviously we're doing all the necessary checks and kind of intelligence around that particular user, but making sure that obviously their details are kept safe and confidential?
Yeah, that's an important factor because we do need to protect people's own privacy rights and their own data. So any solution that you deploy needs to take that into account. So we need to really be able to anonymize data so that we only actually reveal personally identifiable information on a need-to-know basis. So let's have a think about this. If we've got an organization of about 4,000 people, say, and we're monitoring our most risky group of people that we've identified that potentially could be a risk in terms of insider threat management, we're going to perhaps put in place slightly stronger controls. You know, they might have a sort of agent running on their endpoint, their laptop, desktop computer, which is just looking at their behavior, what they're doing. And, for the most part, it's just doing that, right? If they do something that looks like nefarious activity, we might tune up the agent to do a little bit more work for us. So what I mean by that is if we see somebody take a confidential file and rename it to holiday pictures or something, that would indicate some fairly nefarious activity, right? So you might want to check that they're not a compromised user. But if you check that out and they don't look like they've been part of any kind of phishing campaign, their account doesn't look like it's been taken over by anyone, you're confident it's that person, we might turn on things like screen recording at that point, right? The screen recording technology would be useful to record what they're doing, look at their mouse movements, look at what applications they're using, are they trying to email a document out, and so on. We can use that technology, but the problem is the person who's going to look at that data and analyze it is a security analyst, right? And they're going to sit in a security operations center somewhere and they're going to see this activity. There's no good reason for them to know who the person is. We shouldn't necessarily have to share that person's name. That's really, if this turns out to be nefarious activity, that's really for legal and HR to deal with and to know who this individual is. So being able to anonymize data is something I would look for in any kind of technology solution, so that you can make sure that the actual details of individuals is only released on a need-to-know basis. But on a wider point with GDPR, this type of technology is very important, because if you do have a data breach, then the GDPR investigation is going to look an awful lot more favourably on the organisation if they can demonstrate that they were proactively using technologies and had programs in place to try and mitigate risk. And insider threat management is one of those, as is security awareness training and those types of solutions. So these types of solutions are very useful to ensure that you are doing your best to demonstrate that you're taking GDPR seriously.
Brilliant. So really good tool for obviously CISOs, security managers, etc., to implement.
Absolutely, and it gives a lot of visibility as well into what's going on in the organisation, and that is key, visibility.
Fantastic. And it kind of brings me on to my last question. So we've been doing a little bit of research. There's a lot of, in the cyber world, we love stats, statistics, reports, all that kind of information. It is a big thing, insider threat. So a couple of stats, 30% of CISOs see ITM as one of their top concerns. My question around that is, if insider threat has been around for so long, and obviously we've had employees for many, many years, why is it now becoming such a hot topic? Why next month is, the global awareness month for ITM? Is it because tech has changed? Is it because obviously our technology to roll out ITM has made advancements, or why are we kind of seeing a big push now on ITM that we haven't seen before?
That's a great question. I think it's a bit of a mix of all of those things, really. We're all creating more data, and we're all placing it in different places, and we're using data in different ways, accessing it over different channels. That's something that's very much grown and evolved over time. I think technology as well has evolved. The capabilities that we have to be able to investigate and look into what people are doing and where risk lies has really evolved as well. And that's something that's very important, because I think it is interesting that CISOs really have a big focus on insider threat management. I think what they're focusing on is really that they want visibility. If we look in the past, people were very sort of fixated on, I must block someone from doing this particular activity. It was either you can do it or you can't do it. I think a lot more now, it's got a bit more relaxed in some ways. It's a little bit more about, I don't necessarily want to just, be very authoritarian and block people from doing this or that or the other. But I do want to know what they're doing, and I want to be alerted to anything that might start to look a little bit suspicious or malicious, right, or dangerous. So they want that visibility and reporting. And the problem with the blocking mentality is If I block something, oh, well, somebody tried to do this and I blocked it, great. Okay, but hang on a minute. What do you know what they were doing 10 minutes before that? Or do you now know what they're doing tomorrow? If they did something that is a little bit dangerous and you blocked it, perhaps you'd like to know a little bit more about what they do on a regular basis over different channels, over their email or their web uploads and things like that. So I think we're taking a bit more of a holistic approach to, hang on a minute, if I do see something that looks strange, I want to be able to investigate it. Because I don't want something to start small and get ignored and result in a really big data breach, right? And I could actually investigate it and potentially stop something very early on before it becomes a big problem. Okay, so if you identify someone doing something in a way that you don't like, is not very good, you can go and educate them. You could have potentially stopped a huge data breach, because if you hadn't have educated them, they'd carry on doing that for weeks or months. So it's very much about knowing, hey, this person did this, so what else did they do? And being able to investigate that and create a timeline for this particular individual. Let's have a look around their timeline of what they do on a day-to-day basis, what applications they use, how they operate. That takes weeks, months to be able to do, unless you've got the right technology and procedures in place. But with the right technology that is now available, security analysts can really pull this type of information together now in a matter of minutes or hours. So the use of technology can really reduce the time it takes to investigate incidents and actually also be able to get to remediation quicker as well. So incident investigation, remediation is all around visibility and reporting. And I think that's a big area for people to focus on. What sort of visibility do they have today? Is it enough? How could they improve it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the kind of the last comment here, obviously, we spoke about statistics and research, etc. One particular document was really, really informative, which was the Persimmon study around the 2022 Global Threat Intelligence Report. Are there any other resources or anywhere else that you'd recommend people to go to, or perhaps maybe to look at? I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of info coming up in the coming month around that kind of awareness for insider threat. But any kind of tips, any suggestions, anywhere that perhaps maybe people should look when they're starting that journey?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of industry analyst reports out there that you can look at for insider threat management. I would start with those and look at the leaders in sort of insider threat management space. Who are the leading vendors? I'd reach out to your favourite reseller as an organisation and go and talk to them and say, hey, can you help me with insider threat? What vendors are out there? You know, I've looked at this analyst report. These seem to be the leading vendors. I think it's important to look at all of those leading vendors and what they're offering, and look at their capabilities around all the things that we've mentioned today on this podcast, around the visibility, the reporting, the conformance to GDPR, being able to build a proper program for you, and so on. There are also tools that some vendors offer around being able to do some kind of like threat assessment, insider threat assessment. That might be beneficial to you. Often a vendor will be able to run some kind of short assessment to be able to identify what risk might, exist within your organisation. So I think they're the starting points, really. Have a look at those.
Definitely. I think the risk assessments and, some of the ability to work with a vendor who has that experience and wealth and obviously industry presence is quite key. So thank you so much, Graham, for running through all of that. It's been really fascinating and interesting in terms of the tech out there. And I guess, to all the listeners, if you'd like to see more information, or if you want to discuss things a little bit further, then please feel free to reach out. But thank you again, Graham.
Thank you, Catherine.